voices will signal their tired end. The hostess is grinning, her guests sleep from singing. Hear me talk of sin, and you know this is it. Strange days if found out, and through their strange hours we linger alone. Bodies confused, memories misused, as we ran from the day to a strange night of stone. Well, show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. For if we don't find the next whiskey bar, I tell you we must die. I tell you we must die. I tell you, I tell you, I tell you we must die. Oh, moon of Alabama, you now must say goodbye. We've lost our good old mama. I must have whiskey, oh, you know why. Oh, moon of Alabama, we now must say goodbye. We've lost our good old mama, and must have whiskey, oh, you know why. Yeah. Well, show me the way to the next little girl. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next little girl. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. For if we don't find the next little girl, I tell you we must die. I tell you we must die. I tell you, I tell you, I tell you we must die. could not speak. Love me one time. Yeah, my knees got weak. Love me two time, girl. Lost me all through the week. Love me two time. I'm gone away. Love me two time. I'm gone away. Oh yeah. Love me one time, could not speak. Love me one time, baby. Yeah, my knees got weak. Love me two time, girl. Lost me all through the week. Love me two time, I'm gone away. Two-time, babe. Love me twice today. Love me two-time, babe. 'Cause I'm going away. Love me two-time, girl. One for tomorrow, one kiss for today. Love me two-time. I'm going away. Love me two-time, I'm gone away. Love me two times, I'm gone away. You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate is through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate is through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. Yeah. You know that it will be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on 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 fire. Carry me, caravan, take me away. Take me to Portugal, take me to Spain. Andalusia with fields full of grain. I have to see you again and again. Take me, Spanish caravan. Yes, I know you can. Galleons lost in the sea. I know where treasure is waiting for me. Silver and gold in the mountains of Spain. I have to see you again and again. Take me, Spanish caravan. Yes, I know you can. Before you slip into unconsciousness, I'd like to have another kiss, another flashing chance at bliss, another kiss, another kiss. days are bright and filled with pain. Enclose me in your gentle rain. The time you ran was too insane. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. Oh, tell me where your freedom lies. The streets are fields that never die. Deliver me from reasons why you'd rather cry. I'd rather fly. The crystal ship is being filled. 1,000 girls, 1,000 thrills, a million ways to spend your time. When we get back, I'll drop a line. Wait until the war is over and we're both a little older. The unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television, children fed, unborn living, living dead. Bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over for the unknown soldier. It's all over for the unknown soldier. Make a grave for the unknown soldier, nestled in your hollow shoulder. The unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television, children fed. Bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over. The war
everyone, and thank you for joining us on MarshStream, your public performance broadcast platform. My name is Brianna Caver, assistant producer for MarshStream, and we are back again tonight for Solo Arts Heal and Can Edition. Although our theater doors are now back open, there are still some folks unable to attend these live performances, so these free streaming performances are brought to you by patrons just like yourself, all who donate to our tip jar. The link is posted in the chat and is also available on our website at themarsh.org. Remember, all donations are tax deductible and 100% matched. We need you now more than ever so we can continue to bring these free streaming performances to our community. If you're watching us live on YouTube, welcome and thank you for joining us. Please make sure you subscribe to be notified when we go live and watch the hours of free performances, interviews, and events we have archived all right there on our channel. Saturday at the Marsh Berkeley is Josh Kornbluth's Citizen Brain at 5 p.m. and Don Reed's The Never Too Late Show at 8 p.m. Sunday at the Marsh SF is Margot Gomez's Swimming with Lesbians at 5 p.m. and Craig and McGregor at the Marsh Berkeley at 7:30 p.m. Again, please donate to our tip jar. Thank you for joining us. And now let's welcome your host, Rick Davis.
Good evening, everybody. Good to be back. We took a little break last month, and I think you got to see Jesus once again. My friend Jesus. I hope you enjoyed that. Tonight we have a guest who has been well known to our dear producer, John Ivory, for many, many years since college. And he resides in Chicago, as does John Ivory. Some of you may have seen his writing and his poetry and what have you. And we're going to hear a lot more about that. And we are very happy to welcome Dan Barron. Come on in. Hello, Dan Barron.
Thank you.
So you and John go back to what year? Are you going to admit this on the air?
Let's just say last century. No, it was probably 1981.
1981?
Yeah.
Oh, you have more hair than he does now, though.
Some of it's real. Yeah.
I see. Did John have hair when you knew him?
I said that's the thing with the 40 years of the past. I don't remember. You know.
Oh, I see. You know, there were things John said we weren't allowed to talk about, but he never said we weren't allowed to talk about his hair. That was okay, you know. So I'm just saying. Tell us how you knew. Tell us how you and John got to know each other.
Oh, we got to know each other in Champaign, I think, where we went to school at the University of Illinois. And we both applied to study abroad overseas in the University of Warwick in Coventry, England. And that's where we went to school. And I got to know him better there. And I don't want to spoil the whole story, but that's part of it.
Oh, that's just part of the story.
Yeah.
So, are you a Chicagoan? Have you always been a Chicagoan? What's your backstory?
My family moved here from New York when I was like 4. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Deerfield and went to high school in Highland Park. And after college, I lived in Chicago for about 20 years and then moved to Evanston. That's probably too much geographical information, but you asked. So
I served my time in Chicago. I did my time in Chicago, so I know it a little bit. I don't come back too often, but I do know it a little bit. And tell us a little bit about what your profession is and what you do.
I'm a writer and consultant, and I write content and do strategy work and grant writing for nonprofits and universities. And I've also worked as a journalist. I worked for a lot of nonprofit organizations in the Chicago area that focus on serving communities that really are underserved on different issues like public safety or housing or education and so on.
There's a fantastic, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but there's a fantastic health nonprofit on the South Side. Can't remember what I should have looked that one up ahead of time, and that provides community health. I should have looked that one up ahead. I know that it's in some way, shape, or form the person who runs it is associated with the business school at the University of Chicago. They're also a doctor.
Okay.
I can't remember. What it's called. That's never mind. And the health condition that we're going to focus on tonight is mental health, correct?
Yep.
And let's maybe be a little more exact. What you've lived with mental health issues since certainly since the time that you were in Warwick. Before that too, or did it really start at that time?
I think it really started about a year or 14 months before I went to school at Warwick, really a year before, when I was in Champaign-Urbana. I have bipolar disorder, and as I'll say in the story, had some depression when I was in Champaign, and then a manic episode when I was at Warwick.
But growing up, you really weren't much aware of it. This sort of came on you in your late teens.
Yeah, very, very much. It was very unexpected.
And in the family, did you deal with this at all in the family, or was mental health something that just came at you? You suddenly it came into your world.
I think it was pretty sudden what happened with me, and kind of reached, people I knew in that way. And I don't think it was very unexpected.
I asked that because, as you know, we talked a little bit before, I grew up in a family where we wrestled with mental health issues. And so it was familiar to me. But I think in a certain sense, there's a switch around here in that you didn't have to wrestle with it as a child, but once you were an adult, you did. And then when you had a family, you had to wrestle with that too.
Yeah. I think that's what happened. I think that my specific diagnosis is something that often hits people at their late teens or early 20s.
I didn't realize that. I mean, it's fairly common to see the first episode of bipolar at that time.
Yeah, as far as I know, although you read 3 or 4 different things about it, and you get different analysis. But I've definitely heard that for a long time, that it does happen at that age for a lot of people.
In your case, when you first encountered this, did you encounter it in a manic phase, or did you encounter it in a depressive phase?
Well, that's a good question. But when I was in England, I had a manic episode. But a year before, when I was in Champaign, I had depression. And I think a lot of people look at this disorder and see that, it kind of cycles between the two. So I always kind of connected the two. But that's what happened. I didn't have any kind of manic phase back in Champaign. I mean, I was an excitable 19-year-old kid, but I wasn't manic. And then I had this manic episode in England. And then after that happened, it kind of can swing back and forth very quickly.
So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves into the story, but are you going to talk about these first episodes in your story, or can we talk about them now?
Oh, I'm going to go right there.
Okay. Well, maybe it might be a good time to launch into the first story. Maybe that happened to be a good segue into the first story.
Okay, I will trust your judgment on the segue, and I think we're ready to go.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Really appreciate it. I've watched some of the stories here, and you're really making it easier for people to tell their health stories. People have told me that my story is a tough one, just like the stories many people tell about health, but it's good to be able to tell it. And I'm going to tell it like I'm going to share it with friends and family. The only difference is if I was with family, my brothers would interrupt me while I'm talking. You know, that's kind of a joke. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of building on what we were talking about earlier when I was growing up. Everything was fine. At least that's what we believed. My family was together. I had 4 siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. One of my brothers is my identical twin. And I just want to say, hi, Rob. Oh, you don't want to talk now. Okay. Just wanted to say hi, but we'll talk soon. I grew up in Deerfield, Illinois, an almost completely white suburb of Chicago, privileged. Everyone's plan was college, job, marriage, kids, house, grandkids, retirement. That's it. Then you just like death, illness, sex, unemployment, divorce. Nobody who we knew did talk about those things. My family, we laughed, we ate together, we celebrated holidays together. We got annoyed with each other, then we laughed and ate again. I knew that I was loved. My version of the American dream included a lot of sports watching and a lot of movie watching. If you asked me to name the World Series winners for the last 100 years, I could do it. Or I could tell you about 50 great movies of the 1970s in great detail. Of course, those questions don't always come up when you're applying for jobs, but they should. Anyway, I started the college at the University of Illinois in 1980. I did well. I made friends. I studied English and history, tried to meet girls, listened to The Doors a lot, that cheerful music you may have heard before the show started. Wrote papers at 2 a.m. Then, my sophomore year, I was lost. Suddenly, very depressed. I didn't know why. I had trouble getting out of bed, but I guess at college in the 1980s, nobody viewed that as an especially unusual behavior. But I didn't know who to talk to about it. I'd call my parents and my older brother. I saw a counselor a couple of times. That helped a little bit. My dad said to me one time that if things didn't get better, he'd come down there and get me. And I didn't like that. I stopped talking to him about it. I was depressed. I drank and smoked more weed than usual, but nobody seemed to notice. It's what many of us did. My deep depression lasted about 4 months. What next? I applied to study abroad in England. I remember interviewing for the study abroad program. I faked everything. I smiled, answered questions, looked people in the eye, and then somehow I got into the program. It was at the University of Warwick in Coventry. I had something to look forward to. I also grew a very, very thick beard, something to hide behind. I was feeling better. I didn't think that much about the tough times. That fall, I left for England. I thought that this would be a life-changing experience. It was great. I made friends, read poetry and Shakespeare. Yeah, I was lonely sometimes. Drank a few pints, got letters from home, wrote a lot of letters, took trips. I remember enjoying how a highly educated professor once berated students, British and Americans, for being too lazy to read a Shakespeare play that week. He was right. Later, I read it, and then I got standing room only tickets to see Macbeth in Stratford-upon-Avon with my roommate. Macbeth doth murder sleep. And then we had a pint in a local pub. It was glorious. 2 months later, I traveled in Europe. It was a thrilling trip. First, I stayed with a German friend who was at school with me in England. After a week with his family, I took a train by myself to Munich. I had never traveled by myself before in a foreign country. I visited the concentration camp memorial at Dachau. I'm Jewish, I'm very secular, but I wanted to bear witness. I wanted to see it. It was overwhelming, it was disturbing, but it was also exciting to be on my own. 2 days later, I turned 21 in Paris, where I met my friend Kevin from Illinois. Then Kevin and I and my friend Mike raced around France and Italy, eating, drinking, laughing, checking out the sights, taking trains. It was just an awesome trip. When I left Rome after our 2-week trip, I was totally exhausted. I was alone, had to go back to school. I had papers to write at school. I was feeling really sick. Yes, I was troubled by what I saw in Germany, but there was much more going on. I was also excited about, well, everything. And as soon as I got back, I read a letter from a sister who had gotten divorced after 4 months of marriage. That kind of thing had never happened in our family. I also had a real bad case of the flu or something, and I went to the student health service and got some meds, which helped. Then something happened that I hadn't expected at all. My thoughts were racing. I felt very sexual. I was very creative. I had tons of energy. I wrote a lot. I scribbled all over pages and pages, and I thought it was brilliant. I laughed a lot. I felt great. Hard to believe I'd been depressed only about a year before. Then on a Friday afternoon in a common area at school, I sat down and I wrote. There was a woman I had had 2 dates with in college, just lunch and dinner, and we'd ridden each other once. But I wrote her this incredibly passionate and romantic and highly charged and troubled letter. Incoherent. And I mailed it. I also wrote 5 or 6 friends. I had a paper due for my poetry class in England about a poem by John Keats. I wrote 15 pages handwritten about the first word of the poem, which was much. I handed the paper in. I thought it was brilliant. I felt like I was on some kind of magical drug. I ate an apple, including all of the seeds and the stem. Then back in my room, that night I talked with 3 women that I'd become friends with. I told them that I could make love to all of them at the same time. They had a front row seat to my life that day, and they were concerned. They left. I went upstairs to my room, tried to sleep. My roommate was not there at the time. For the next few hours, I could not sleep. My heart was pounding so fast. I thought I was having a heart attack. I was sweating. I thought I was dying. This went on and on and on throughout the night. It got worse and worse until I got out of bed and knocked on the door of one of the women I talked to. I told her I needed some help. Suddenly, I was in a hospital, laughing and crying, strung out in the middle of the night, not making sense. I couldn't stop talking. Soon, I was in an ambulance, going to another hospital. I was terrified. The next part I remember very clearly. When I got to the next hospital, a man and a woman, both dressed in white coats, each held on to one of my arms firmly and walked me to a room and held me down. Someone pulled down my pants and injected a needle into my backside. And that is when my terror peaked. Suddenly, I felt that I was no longer dying. I knew that I was dead. This was some kind of hell. I knew that I was dead. I woke up heavily sedated in a hospital with a man and a woman on two sides of my hospital bed. I had no affect, no thoughts. I was nearly 4,000 miles from home. I was traumatized. And there at the end of my bed was my mom, who had flown in from Chicago. Amazing. Later, a week later maybe, we flew back to Chicago together. I was drugged up. The day after we got back, I was in a hospital in Chicago on the city's south side. I knew it was a psychiatric hospital, and the floor I was on was wild, noisy, people struggling, chaos, a lot of staff. And I was one of the wildest of all, laughing, crying, scared, manic. After a couple of weeks, I told two young women I'd met that I was leaving. It was time to go back to England. I packed my suitcase. I was ready. I can still remember their faces and their names and the shock on their faces as I told them my plans. That day, my doctor diagnosed me as manic depressive, now known as bipolar disorder, and put me on lithium. I took blood tests every day at first to check the level of the medication in my system to make sure it was safe. At first, it made me dizzy and sick to my stomach, but then I got more used to it. That sounds easier than it was. It was tough. I had no idea about what would happen. But I did get better, slowly. I was now on a quieter floor. Walking alone, I was sad and sick, though not suicidal. They didn't want me to have visitors at that time. That would have been too stimulating. Somehow I realized that I was not going to go back to school in England. I didn't know if I was going to go back to school in Champaign. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I accepted that I was sick. And the most important person who was going to help me get better was me. So much happened during that time. One day, my doctor asked me to write an autobiography, a great idea. And 3 days later, I gave him 75 handwritten pages. But this time, it made sense. I met a girl in the hospital, and we became friends. And then we kissed. I thought, wow, this is the kind of medicine I like. I played basketball in a gym near the hospital. They had a program where you could play basketball. I guess I was pretty good for a, 5'5" Jewish bipolar point guard, but it was fun. I was starting to do things that I like to do. I started reading again. A few weeks later, it was time to leave the hospital. Slowly, I'd gotten better. I was getting stronger. My parents drove me home. My dad, who was so emotional, told me on the ride home that it was one of the happiest days of his life. Nobody said another word for the rest of the trip. The next day, I remember it vividly, March 19th, 1983. I went for a walk, and I could see the concern on my parents' faces. This was the first unsupervised thing I had done in over 2 months. I walked to the lake, and then I went to a bar for a drink. Somewhere on Broadway, just south of Belmont in Chicago, near where my parents lived. Oh, to just sit somewhere and reflect and listen to a jukebox and enjoy the world. The bartender asked me, "How you doing today?" And I said, "I'm okay." And I was even starting to believe it. Life wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to be. that I was here.
Whoa. A lot to take in. A lot to take in. And how long was it between the time that you were hospitalized in Warwick and the time when you just finished that story?
2 months and 3 days. And I think 3 hours. Yeah,
2 months?
It was 2 months and 3 days. Yeah.
2 months and 3 days. I'm curious about a lot of things. And I guess maybe start by asking you about these meds, because I remember trying myself antidepressant meds in the 80s, and I couldn't tolerate them. I just felt like they put me in another space. So I'm very curious how you managed with the lithium. Did they ever have to adjust it? Or did it just become part of your existence? Did it change your existence?
It's a good question. They started me at a higher dose, which actually, I don't know if this will be meaningful to people, but it was 2,400 milligrams. And as I said in the story, there were some pretty strong side effects. But I think that for my doctor, this was a pretty clear case, pretty clear diagnosis based on my behavior. And then they lowered it. And then when I left the hospital, I was on the same dose for, I think, 29 years. And then when I hit 50, I was still on the same medication, but I guess the doctors explained to me that, you don't need the same amount of it when you're a certain age. So they lowered it a little bit then. But I've always been on just that medication, except for when I was sedated that night in Coventry. Yeah.
As heart-grabbing as this story is, the fact that you've been able to manage so well on a single medication the whole time is truly a blessing, Dan. I mean, I know so many people that just they have to switch because they're not balanced anymore, and they've got to try a different med. And has that been said to you before? Is that anything you
yeah, I did have one psychiatrist when I told him I hadn't had a relapse in 39 years, and he said, "Wow." So, if that's all he's going to say to me, that's okay.
It's and do you feel it changed the way that you interacted with the world on a stable basis? I'm not talking about when you were manic, when you were depressed, but before those times when you were in equilibrium and after those times when you were in equilibrium. Was it the same equilibrium?
Oh, no. This was very much a growing up experience. And I looked at it kind of just in that way, like everybody or most people I know have a growing up experience, whether it's parents being divorced or somebody passing away, being in a war, being a victim of violence and whatever, moving away from home. There's a lot of different ways that happens. It happened to me at exactly that time where I was, kind of trying to grow up and moving on. And that was the challenge I had to meet.
And your twin, did he wrestle, or does he wrestle with any issues, or was this just you?
He did not have bipolar diagnosis at all, and I think it's a question that often comes up. But we're very different. I think it's a question that comes up because we're twins, but yeah, we're different. We have different temperaments, and we're very close. But yeah, the answer is no.
It raises a really interesting issue to me personally, and I wonder what your thought on this is to what extent are mental health issues genetically driven, or are they driven by your social environment, or is it a mixture?
I think it's both. I think that the literature on that, I've read some of it. I'm not a doctor, just a curious guy who takes a pink pill every day, or 3 of them, But I think that there's really mixed literature on it. I have heard, read a number of things that saying there's genetic basis for bipolar, but not necessarily proven in a conclusive way. So I think it's both. I think that my experience, I feel there were like 5 or 6 different environmental triggers. One of which was that I was an impressionable 20-year-old who listened to a lot of music and read certain books and saw certain movies, and was very, very inexperienced about the world. But plus all the things I mentioned in the story,
Yeah, I guess in your own situation, what happened first was sort of a depressive issue, which in many ways I think is a lot easier to mask or to control or to live with than the manic, because in that manic phase, it's manic. Things just get out of control, and
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's true. And when I had the manic episode, I did not understand the link between what I was going through and what had happened to me in school a year earlier. But I think that was part of it, and I think there's a cycling that goes on with the bipolar disorder, and I think that's what happened.
I'm thinking maybe we should hear the next part of your story, because I really want to get into how you've handled the manic, this bipolar, and where it's led you, and how you've helped other people with their bipolar issues. But why don't we lead into the second part of the story, and then we'll finish up talking about some of those aspects.
Okay. Okay, well, the first part of my bipolar journey was by far the most intense period of my life. 5 countries, 3 hospitals, 3 powerful medications, an ambulance, a nightmare of trauma, a diagnosis. And yes, I did seek a life-changing experience when I decided to study abroad. And I sure as hell got one. I've lived for 40 years as a bipolar person since that experience. The story since then, though, has been about healing. And when I think about healing, I don't think about specific events. I think about people and my relationships with myself, my parents and siblings, my kids, partners, friends, sometimes people I work with, and the medical community. I learned a whole bunch of ways that I can help myself. The week I left the hospital, my doctor, who was an excellent doctor, said that when I get out, I shouldn't run around like a chicken with his head cut off. This from a highly respected doctor and leader in his field. So yes, it was great to be advised that I shouldn't be a headless chicken. But no one in the hospital gave me practical advice about basic things like eating, sleeping, and exercise. I had to teach myself about those things. They all affect my mood, and I focus on them every day. Yeah, I'm the guy on the corner checking his phone to see how many steps he's taken that day. I walk 3 miles every day. I'm the guy who has oatmeal every morning. I even brought a small plastic bag of uncooked oats into a coffee shop in New York City once when I met my kid, Noah. I got some hot water and made my breakfast, and my kid said that this was such a dad thing to do. I don't know if that was a compliment. Still, another key to my healing has been writing. I write in a journal regularly. I do it to remember joyous and sometimes tough things that happen, and as a way to better understand myself. I've also worked as a writer for 30 years, writing mostly about people in underserved communities, hundreds, even thousands of people who have been resilient in their lives. They've inspired me. People who have survived domestic violence, racism, war, and a lot more. I think often about an Ernest Hemingway quote: "The world breaks everyone, but afterward, many are stronger at the broken places." The medical part of my journey since I left the hospital has been the easiest part. I've had great health because of how I've taken care of myself, my strong community, and because I had access to decent medical care, which so many people don't have at all. I've been lucky, and I've never had a relapse. Still, talking about mental illness can be tough. We know that. There's still so much stigma about mental illness. I think this goes back centuries. People are either scared of it or pity people who have mental illness, or there's shame. A lot of times I don't talk about it at all. People can even be cruel or dismissive about it. That's happened to me a few times. And when that happens, I think we can do better than that, much better. For the last 60 years or so, I think more people have talked about it, but there's often a copay involved and a clock, hopefully a competent therapist. That's helped me sometimes. But what about face-to-face conversations about it with people in my life? I've driven a car that was demolished by a truck, had emergency heart surgery, had another emergency surgery, been through a divorce, been out of work. But my hospitalization for bipolar was much tougher than any of these things. And yet, when I bring it up, I can see how people often lower their eyes and lower their voices. My father was very uncomfortable when the subject came up. He didn't want to talk about it. Eventually, I wrote him a 25-page letter that explained exactly what happened. It was still too painful for him to talk about. But I felt great after telling him my story. And ultimately, we were close, even though our relationship was like any relationship, not perfect. We can all do better and have more courage and empathy about mental health. And that includes me. Still, I always knew that my family loved me, even though I often had the urge to say more about this experience, which I'm doing right now. I have 2 wonderful kids. Both are in their early 20s, and their generation has its own very profound challenges. This story is also for them and anyone out there that it can help. If you're watching, I want to say to my kids, Noah and Asher, I love you very much. Talking about being bipolar has always been easier with friends. And I had a great group of friends when I went back to college and after that. It's tough to see friends face mental illness, of course, but traumatic when it happens in a family. Families and friends should both know more about ways they can help. So here's kind of a commercial. I'm a volunteer presenter for a group called the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which tries to fight stigma about mental illness and share stories of people who have it and families that are going through it. And people should seek out resources like this when they need help. What's really rare, at least in my experience, is when someone not only listens, but engages and asks good questions about my illness. That's a sign of trust. It means we can go here, and it does happen. It happened a few months ago with a woman I'm dating. She not only asked me good questions, but I got a drink out of it as well. My story started with trauma. I had a life-changing growing up experience that led to a daily commitment to live a healthy life. And now telling the story is a part of that. I think of where it started, with pages and pages of manic scribbles in another country. Then it became a handwritten autobiography I wrote in a hospital. Then a manuscript. I hope a couple publishers are listening, but we'll talk about that later. And now I'm sharing my story with you on this website and later on YouTube. Because telling this story is a way of saying it's real. And yes, we can definitely talk about it.
I'm anxious to talk about it. I'm anxious to talk about it. How do you, I'm thinking in the dating situation or with close, with friends that you meet. How do you introduce it to the conversation? Do you need to introduce it to the conversation? Are there signals that you give that other people might not give because they hadn't been through this and you feel they need to be explained? I mean, is it something you could hide permanently from the world if you so chose?
There are people I know who I haven't talked to about it. A lot of people I've worked with, a couple of friends I haven't told the whole story. For the most part, I just have to say that sharing it with friends has been very easy in a lot of ways. They're my friends, and I expect them to believe it and understand it. I think that as the years have passed, as I've met new people, I just made a decision about when I trusted somebody with that story. And sometimes, like in a dating situation, don't get to it at all. This is not somebody I'm going to be seeing, or they're not going to be seeing me. But if I trust somebody, I tell them the story. And at this point, if they don't accept it, I move on. But people tend to get it once you talk about it. I think they really do, or they know somebody who's going through something,
right?
Something in their life that they can relate to it.
Right. Do you? Are people surprised? Are they shocked when they hear this story from you? Do they not see this as being Dan Barron today?
I don't think they're shocked. I think people know that this goes on, but they're surprised. And when it tells to somebody for the first time, their ears are open. Their ears are open. It's not something that they're going to hear every day, But I'm fine with talking to people about it. It's just, I like to make sure that there's a feeling of trust there. And I would say that maybe in all cases, or certainly the vast majority of them, I'm telling people on a one-on-one level, maybe a couple of times couples or something like that. But yeah, that's how I do it.
And I mean, you spoke to your kids during the story. Did it change the way in which your kids responded to you when you told this story? Did it change your?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they already knew who I was. I think I first told it to my kids when they were in sixth grade. I kind of wish I had shared more with them about it over the years, but they know about it, and I think that I think they get it. I think they get it. And I also mentioned something about the challenges that young people are facing now.
Mm.
And I think there's a great deal of empathy that my kids have for people and people who are struggling with things, because
Oh yeah.
they've grown up in a world in the last 5 years where, pandemic, climate change, violence, political unrest, and a lot more. So
I think they've grown up in a society in the United States, and possibly this is true in some of the Western societies, where the acceptance of mental health illnesses is much more open than it was when I was growing up and when you were growing up.
I would agree with that. I still think there's a tremendous stigma about talking about it. I think I look at it as like, kind of taking some steps and a few more to take.
Yeah, I related very much to what you said about your father being unable to embrace what happened on an outward level and to talk to you about this until you wrote him this letter. I grew up with a mother who had 27 shock treatments, and people would never, ever say that my mother had mental illness. They'd say, "Oh, your mother's not well. Oh, your mother's poorly," but
Yeah.
they'd never name what happened. And so that stigma was very powerful for me as a child. It's not something that I've continued. If I feel, if I have no problem admitting my situation or expressing my situation and embracing people that live through mental illness. But I think that it is a lot easier to say today somebody's manic, somebody's chronic depressive, and for it to be received in a welcoming way. Have you seen a difference over the last 40 years since this happened? Have you seen a difference?
I have seen a difference. In most cases, I really don't talk that much with a lot of my friends about it. I just kind of got to the point where I thought this would be a story that, as part of my life, I would have, wanted to tell stories. I do storytelling in Chicago. But in general, I think that there's been some progress, but I think I still think we have a ways to go, and a lot of people, a lot of families don't want to talk about it. And one thing that really concerns me is when I read about funding for schools, and all right, they're gonna reduce the funding or cut the funding for counseling services, So I still think we need to have that commitment to go along with, maybe having a more open discussion about it.
Yeah, I think that there are some very significant issues in the medical community as well. I mean, we at ANCAN have really made a commitment to address mental health issues, and so many mental health issues arise out of another condition. I mean, they don't originate in a with a mental health condition, but other conditions create a mental health condition. And I feel like in many instances, the medical community doesn't take responsibility for that, and they don't necessarily go out of their way to help people deal with these mental health issues. Now, just recently, there was a new advisory that suggests that there should be more testing for anxiety across the board. But in many specialties, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that my experience with the medical community is that, you know, in many cases, doctors or specialists, they may not have great communication with other specialists, and you know, they're under various stresses, and so there's some gaps in terms of accessing services that people need. I also think that accessing mental health services has become a lot more common for people who have resources, you know, and okay, well, you know, you can afford to go to therapy, or you can afford this or that, but if it's got to be available for everybody, and it's not.
Well, I think one sort of equalizing factor may be that the drugs, there are many more types of antidepressants out there and manic drugs, and the drugs may well be more readily available without having to see a psychiatrist, that the GPs are willing to prescribe them. How well, I don't know, but they're at least willing to prescribe them, and that makes them more accessible. Now, of course, that gets into the whole discussion about how accessible general health care is. And many people don't have even that basic level of health care, which concerns me and certainly concerns you from the work that you've done.
Yeah.
But the ongoing cost of a therapist, which can be expensive, you may also be able to address some of that through accessible medications.
Yeah. But, you know, especially in the last few years with the pandemic,
Yeah,
I've heard many times about how hard it is to, you know, find a counselor.
yeah. Oh, for sure. That we have it. How do you feel as a writer, as a professional writer? How do you feel your work has helped you deal with this aspect of your health?
Well, from what I said, my work has introduced me to so many stories about people who are resilient, and that is what it has taken in my life to you know, to really get through this and to try to live a happy life. And that's what I believe. So, you know, it's the story of how people respond to challenges in their life. But it's also the story, you know, as a former journalist, of whether public policies are meeting those needs or not.
Mm-hmm.
So both of those things have informed my journey.
If anybody has any questions, by the way, now is the time to put them in the chat window so we can get them in. Have you ever considered an anthology of or a series of your own stories on or about people living with mental health issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually have. One of the writers that I've followed very closely is Studs Terkel, who, has done so many oral biographies. And I thought it would be good to interview a lot of people who have faced these challenges and just listen to them and, in their words, tell those stories in an anthology. And, many of them are going to be hopeful, as I hope my story is.
There is a question in the chat window. I'm a little slow. And the question is, did you, and this comes from Scott Whitehair, did you have to find new coping mechanisms or a new unique routine of self-care as we face the radically different world of the pandemic?
Yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. Yeah, I want to say that as soon as the pandemic started and I knew I was going to be, working out of the home full time, and one of my kids was still in high school, was with me half time, I realized that I'm going to have to get out much more often. And that is really when I started just kind of being a pretty compulsive walker, and just about every single day. And that changed with the pandemic, I think.
So what lies in the future for Dan Baron in how in future processing of this mental health experience and maybe how you bring it to help others with bipolar disorder?
Well, I'd like to keep telling this story. There's a lot more to it. I'd like to listen to other people who tell their stories and maybe do a project like the one we just discussed. I don't define myself by being bipolar. In fact, there were a lot of years when it just didn't really come up. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a double-edged sword. Well, I want to talk about it. There's a lot to talk about, but at the same time, a lot of people in my world, my friends and family, I had a good relationship with, even though I wanted to share more of it. But I think that keep telling the story. That's it. And that's something I believe people should do anyway about whatever challenges and joys they're facing in their lives.
Dan, we're very privileged. I feel very privileged to have you share the story with Ancan and with us tonight. And, it touches me greatly, personally. And I think you've probably touched a lot of other people. And I just keep doing this work, keep helping people through your own experience, and may you be healthy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. And thanks for watching.
So I don't quite know who is going to be here next month. It's that famous guest TBD that often appears, but we've never actually seen in person. But we'll be back next month. Don't forget the tip box, please, for the Marsh, and take a look at our own website, ancan.org. We're doing some great stuff, particularly in the area of mental health. I'm trying to recruit Dan to join one of our groups. We have if any of the gents on here live with a chronic condition, we have a wonderful support group called Men Speaking Freely. It's drop-in, it's free, and we'd love to see you in there, and we talk about everything and anything except treatment. We meet twice a month, and maybe I'll get to meet you in person. in Men Speaking Freely.
Thank you.
So, well, not really in person, virtually in person. To anybody who's listening, I hope to meet Dan and see Dan in Men Speaking Freely. Brianna, I'm handing it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Please make sure you check out our website for more information on our upcoming shows for the rest of this week. And don't forget to donate to the tip jar. Have a good evening.
How do I describe my journey with
your mother, who takes care of you, who takes you to the doctor when you're sick? Your mother.
Good morning, New York. Buenos dias. It's me. What's up?
We went out for lunch at a sushi place where she tried sushi for the first time and she liked it.
I see that change can happen. I know things can shift and change for good.
I am dizzily dazzled with stars in my eyes.
Same level as I broke my neck. But he's not getting the same return of function I am.
And I don't want any of your smart aleck sex talk that I usually get when I get.
This is beyond the marsh because what you're doing is planting beautiful seeds for artists to grow.